Bombs pounding away at rebel-held enclaves. Airstrikes specifically targeted Damascus's eastern Ghouta suburbs, where 400,000 people have been trapped since 2013. Bombs in the town of Douma and Harasta were particularly deadly. These latest airstrikes are part of the government's offensive to recapture major rebel strongholds in western Syria. Idlib, in the north, has also been bombarded. The United Nations are also investigating claims that chemical weapons were used after civilians accused Bashar al-Assad's troops of using chlorine bombs.
2 bombs fell on us. There was a small explosion. Someone said chlorine, chlorine. After 10 minutes we started to suffocate. Some began vomiting and others were screaming. Then the civil defence team saved us and drove us to the hospital.
The UN have called for an immediate ceasefire to allow aid to reach the besieged areas. They have requested that this truce should last at least a month.
Russia has been working with Iran and Turkey on Syria. Tell us specifically about Turkey's involvement.
Actually, Turkey is being more and more involved in Syria day by day. We see here on the green zone the first involvement of Turkey against the Islamic State and the Kurdish militias at the time. And then we have these attacks in the last weeks. We see the green dots. These are the points of entry of the Turkish army against the Kurdish YPG. And we see here the deployment between the Kurdish YPG and rebel forces. And lately, we see that the Turkish army went all through Idlib up to South Aleppo. This is the first time that the Turkish army goes that far into Syrian territory. We heard many rumors days ago that the Russians targeted the Turkish convoy, which wasn't true at all, because we have to know that everything Turkey is doing in Syria, it's doing it with the okay of Russia, despite all the announcement and the political claims, etc., etc. They are advancing day by day with the okay of Russia, and all this was implemented with the Astana agreement, because actually Turkey is fixing the fronts by this deployment, because we see that Turks freezed the front of Aleppo from the north and the east, and now they are freezing it on the west. So this is what counts, and this is the de-escalation zone, and this way the Turks are containing all this rebel zone where there is jihadi activity. We have Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which split from Al-Qaeda, but we also have new Al-Qaeda offshoots in this region which aren't connected to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham.
And what are the Turks doing south of Aleppo?
But actually, we saw the first images of the convoy this morning. What they are doing in south of Aleppo is they are creating, here are the images of the Turkish convoy, they are creating a buffer zone between the loyalists, the Syrian army, and the rebel groups and the jihadis on the other hand. This way they will have the upper hand. But we shouldn't forget there are many forces on the ground which don't like this. So Al-Qaeda offshoots don't like this Turkish involvement, but also Shia militias in the town of Al-Hadar, which is just in front of the town where the Turkish army is deployed, so south of Aleppo. And we saw that there are many frictions between Shia militias and the Turkish army in the last weeks. So there are many subversive forces on the ground, but on the political level, what is being implemented is what Moscow, Ankara, and Damascus, by the way, wants to be implemented, because Syrian forces took all the area east of the railroad, and what's left is a small area with jihadi factions, rebel factions, who are going to end up to fight each other under Russian and American bombs.
All right, thank you very much indeed for your analysis, Wasim.
A race against time as wounded civilians are rushed to a local hospital in Idlib province. Dozens were injured on Sunday evening, many of them children, after a fresh wave of airstrikes by Russian warplanes. The raids hit 2 hospitals and several apartment buildings. Rescue teams on the ground say many have been killed.
Russian warplanes struck a 7-story building and a 4-story building. So far we've pulled out 6 bodies from the rubble. At least 1 child was injured.
The province of Idlib in northern Syria has seen fierce fighting in recent weeks. This as Syrian government forces are trying to regain control of the area, one of the last still in rebel hands. They've been helped by Russian warplanes who've carried out dozens of airstrikes since December, despite Idlib being declared a de-escalation zone by Turkey, Russia and Iran last summer. Sunday's attack came just a day after rebels linked to al-Qaeda shot down a Russian jet. The pilot managed to eject on time, but was captured and killed in a ground fight.
Well, to discuss Turkey's campaign in Syria and the crackdown that's prompted in Turkey, I'm happy to say that we are joined here by the Turkish MP Garo Payan. He is a member of the pro-Kurdish party, the HDP, which has been very critical of this campaign in Afrin. Thank you so much for coming on to the programme, Mr. Garo. First of all, tell us, why is it that your party is so critical of Erdogan's campaign in the Afrin region?
Afrin is a diverse safe haven which has managed to stay out of this Syrian civil war fire. And in Afrin, not only the Kurds, the Arabs, Armenian, Assyrians, Christians, Yazidis, everyone has managed to establish a diverse safe haven. And why are we attacking to Afrin? And no attack has been come from Afrin to Turkey, even not a stone. But unfortunately, Turkey is blaming the YPG supporters and Afrin, the people who are living in Afrin, as a threat. Afrin is not a threat. And we have to think about a democratic, if we want to think about democratic Syria, we need safe havens like Afrin. But we don't need to attack to Afrin. That is why we are criticizing our government.
Well, Erdogan would say the YPG there are affiliated with the PKK, which are a terrorist organisation. How do you respond to that claim?
No, people are trying to keep their houses. Turkey is attacking to Afrin. That is the problem, and no threat has been come to Turkey from Afrin. But and they are trying to save their houses. And the people, not only the Kurds, the Armenians, Assyrians, the Arabs are there, and so many refugees have moved to Afrin in the Syrian civil war. Afrin's population was about 300,000. Now it is about 800,000 people are staying in there in safe havens. So why are we attacking to Afrin? That is the biggest problem. We have to think about it. And moreover, Afrin is a diverse safe haven which supports gender equality and a diverse haven. That is the model we need to support in the Middle East, Syria and Turkey. That is what we are supporting Afrin's autonomy and people in Afrin. We need to stop this war, and unfortunately Erdogan is attacking on the people who says we need to keep the peace and democratization, and he's detaining so many people in Turkey who supports the peace. This is the biggest problem, so we need to show our solidarity to the people and to the system which supports plurality and diversity.
What's your view of what the United States is doing for the moment? They, of course, had supported the Kurds in Syria in their fight against the Islamic State. Now it seems they've slightly distanced themselves from the Kurds. Do you feel like Kurds in the region are being abandoned by the United States?
It's not only about the Kurds. The Kurds are suffering, Arabs are suffering, Christians are suffering in Syria, and it is a big game of the big powers. We need to, all the region's peoples have to come together, the Kurds, Turks and the Arabs, to establish the safe havens, how to live together, to manage to live together. This is we are not trying to do that, and the big powers are playing their games. The Russians and the Americans are playing their games, and the Kurds and the Arabs and all the people there are suffering. This is the biggest problem. So we are trying to convince our government to make away with the Kurds and the Arabs. But the Turkish government is behaving like a Turkish nationalist and radical Islamist. This is the biggest problem. We need to engage with the Kurdish people, Arab people, Christians, and establish safe havens. That is what we are offering to People's Democratic Party, and me as my party. This is what we are offering for the region, for Turkey and for Syria.
And what about what is happening in terms of the crackdown inside Turkey? Your party, the HDP, several people within it have been detained. At least 300 people across Turkey have been detained. What worries you most about how dissent is being silenced now in Turkey?
They understand we don't want war, no to war. That is what they said on the Twitter or social media. That is why they are detained. So, due to the international law, to support war is a crime. To support peace is not a crime. But unfortunately, Erdogan is detaining the ones who says no to war.
Well, I mean, Erdogan would say, he would respond to that and say your party is the political wing of the PKK. How do you respond to those allegations?
I'm an Armenian. There are Turks in my party, Kurds, Arabs, and everyone. And we established our party to establish democracy in Turkey. How come HDP can be a wing of the PKK? HDP offers democracy and wants to establish democracy in Turkey. And me, as an Armenian, have big fears because 100 years ago, the same thing happened for the Armenians. And it ended with the Armenian genocide. We had the demand as Armenians. Now the Kurds have the same demands. And unfortunately, the government doesn't have any response to those demands and only oppressing all those demands and saying, no, we are not going to be a democracy. This is the Turks' land. Whether you want it or not, you have to stay silent. People doesn't want to stay silent. People want equality, democracy, and peace in Turkey. This is what we offer for Turkey.
And it does seem now that freedom of expression in Turkey is getting worse since the failed coup. How do you challenge that, and what can be done?
Turkey was a candidate country for the EU, and we could speak everything in Turkey. I mean, genocide, Kurdish demands, gender equality, every kind of demands can be spoken in Turkey, could be spoken. But nowadays, whatever Erdogan says is a rule, unfortunately. And whoever opposes to that is a traitor. That is the biggest problem. There is no freedom of speech, and whoever just opposes to Erdogan either is in jail or will be in a big trouble. That is the biggest trouble. So the European countries has to support the Turkish democracy. This is what the European countries should do, and support the ones who support democracy in Turkey.
Garo Payan, thank you so much for your time. Garo Payan is a Turkish member of parliament for the pro-Kurdish HDP party, talking to us on the programme this afternoon.
Residential areas are often the target. Buildings flattened, civilians killed and injured. Pro-Syrian government forces have been on the offensive into the opposition-held province of Idlib for weeks now. But since fighters from Hayat Tahrir al-Shem shot down a Russian aircraft and killed its pilot, it has escalated. Russian and Syrian aircraft have carried out dozens of airstrikes in a number of towns in the past 48 hours. At least 2 major hospitals have been hit. One of them is now out of service. The assault is being described as one of the fiercest yet. It includes a suspected chlorine attack in the town of Sarakib. Now the Syrian army says it has deployed air defenses and anti-aircraft missiles to the front lines in Aleppo and Idlib to cover the airspace of the north. It says the deployment is a message to everyone.
The S-400 are Russian, and they are controlled by the Russian intelligence, not the Syrian regime. So this is Russia. We need to understand there is an indirect confrontation between the US and Russia. It's dangerous because at the same time Turkey is trying to force its presence in the area.
The deployment of anti-aircraft missiles could also be a message to Turkey. Its planes are using Syrian airspace in its offensive against the Kurdish YPG in Afrin. Turkey had Russian backing to do so, but at the same time, the Syrian government has threatened to shoot down Turkish jets. On the ground, Turkey's army is deployed deep inside Idlib, where it set up posts as part of the Astana de-escalation agreement. Turkish troops are now positioned less than 5 kilometers from pro-Syrian government forces.
The northwestern corner of Syria is now the main battleground. Russia, the United States, Turkey and Iran are the main players. Pro-Syrian government forces want Idlib. Turkey wants to clear Afrin from the YPG. And it's no coincidence that Iran is now calling on Turkey to stop its military operation in Afrin. The players are sending political messages to each other, and it's not the first time they negotiate on the battlefield.
And it's not the first time civilians are the pawns. The other main rebel stronghold in Syria, the Damascus suburb of eastern Ghouta, is also coming under heavy fire. Many civilians have been killed and injured in the besieged area. The United Nations is calling for the fighting throughout Syria to stop for a month to allow aid deliveries and evacuations of the sick and wounded. That call is unlikely to be heeded, at least not until the latest round of negotiations is settled on the ground. Sana Khudr, Al Jazeera, Beirut.